York's law, being that you are an attorney here in New York State, around wrongful death? Are they in line with other states?
No, actually, this is an area of the law where New York is really behind the times. In fact, I think the only other state that's as conservative as New York is Alabama, which some people will probably conclude says a lot.
Yeah.
The New York State trial lawyers, in conjunction with many of our legislators, have put before Governor Hochul what's called the Grieving Families Act. It's been passed by the Senate and the Assembly for several years in a row, and the governor has vetoed that bill 3 consecutive years. That law seeks to greatly expand the people who can recover for a loved one's wrongful death and the types of damages that can be recovered in a wrongful death case. Right now in New York State, as it's been for like 160 or 170 years, the only damages that are recoverable by an estate are what are known as conscious pain and suffering and pecuniary loss. And I want to get into that in a little more detail so you understand exactly how conservative and limiting this can be.
Okay.
The pecuniary loss element is what really upsets the most people. In New York, you have to prove that the person who died was a provider of some sort. So what happens when someone who isn't a provider financially for a family dies, say an elderly grandparent in a nursing home or a very young child? What type of pecuniary loss can be shown by an estate when people who fit those profiles die tragically? It can be very difficult and very hard. And in fact, the damages can be very modest. Attorneys have to be creative and they have to resort to some very, I don't want to say ingenious ways to prove damages, but we'll stick with creative ways to show that a family has indeed sustained pecuniary loss when, say, a teenager or a young child dies. Mm-hmm. It often involves, in my experience anyways, bringing aboard forensic economists to put dollar value to services that those young children provided, whether it be mowing grass or babysitting. Kind of the same thing with elderly people as well. But it gets harder to make those arguments if you're dealing with an elderly person who, say, has lost his or her faculties or is in some sort of advanced care ward. Proving economic damages that were lost when those types of people die is hard. And this is what causes a lot of grief and a lot of strife when I'm explaining these things to clients. This subject has involved some of the most difficult conversations I've ever had in my experience, because when you have to explain to a parent or a child that the loss of their loved one is very limited by New York State law, it causes a lot of stress and anxiety and further grief. It's very, very difficult.
And it almost seems or feels like the value of that loss is based on what they could make as an income or what their value was in the working world versus what their value was as a family member. And that's why conversation.
Yes. I can't tell you how many times I've had to talk to family members about how they should not, in their own minds and hearts, conclude that the value of their loved one is only worth X dollars based on New York law. I know those words sometimes have not penetrated or pierced, the heartstrings or the grief. And I do my best to try and reconcile that. But I know it probably doesn't hold much water with people, despite the accuracy of the information. Mm-hmm. That's one of the elements the Grieving Family Act is looking to cure. Right now in New York law, surviving family members cannot be compensated for their grief, their heartache, their loss. That's not the way it works in New York. It's like that across the country in many other states. And that even in the people who are entitled to make those claims expand beyond just, say, the husband, wife, or the children. Grandparents, siblings, people who are a little further outside what you'd consider the nuclear family can put in their claims for wrongful death. That's not the way it is here in New York at all. And there's certainly no compensation for the grief and loss sustained by the survivors. That's one of the most important elements the Grieving Families Act is trying to remedy, but it's being met with a lot of resistance at the highest levels. Of course, you can imagine the insurance companies are always, reciting about how costly expanding the damages to survivors in these cases will be to them. Bottom line, always at the forefront when it comes to insurance companies. Personally, I think it's just a matter of time before New York catches up with everybody else, and the insurance company arguments will be set aside. But it's never changed here in New York, and this is going to be an ongoing battle for sure.